All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. As I move my mouse around, I'm getting a trailing of circles, right? And I'm also getting a kind of some artifacts here in the background. Now, remember that as I move my circles around, right, it's drawing them, and then in the next frame, it's drawing them again. So if we want to not have those artifacts, we need to make sure that we refresh the background in between each frame. So what we're going to do is inside the draw structure, we're going to refresh the background by stating again that we want the background to be white. Right? So now we don't have those artifacts. And our circles are trailing our mouse, and they're decreasing in size as we go. All right, so now you can go ahead and say, I want 25 frames, or let's try 50. Right? You can try a couple of different settings in terms of your file and see what kind of behavior you get or graphics output you get as a result. So go ahead and experiment with changing a couple things. While you're doing that, I'll save my file. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about this previous question, which is I want my size for the purpose of my program to be 400 by 400. Right? And if I go too much bigger, right, I might max out my pixels for my screen, right, because you probably have something like 1900 or 1920 by 1080 pixels to work with. So let's say you wanted to do a large print. It requires much more detail than, let's say, 1900 pixels wide. So as a reminder, right, the display window is working in pixels. Right? Even though what we see might look like vector shapes, what we're displaying here is just a collection of pixels that are updating each frame. So if you wanted to keep this small, right, all the proportions are working, it's not chugging, it's calculating pretty quickly, but you wanted to have a larger output than 400 pixels by 400 pixels, the key here would be to switch the output from a raster image to something that is capable of storing vector information. So if you go back to the processing reference, right, there's under libraries an option to export PDFs, right? So if you go here, this shows you that there's some information about how to write PDF files from processing as opposed to PNGs or JPEGs. And you can use this as a reference to implement it inside of your program so that whenever you hit that mouse pressed, you'll export a PDF instead. And that's vector. So you could open that up in Illustrator, set it to be whatever dimensions you want, and everything will scale without losing resolution. So that's a really good question. All right. Another question that came up just now was how can we change the fill color based on the mouse position? All right, that's a really good one. So what we can do is either we can use a variable fill based on how many frames we have so that the trailing circles change in color, so that the ones by my mouse are cyan and the ones that are far away are a different color. Or we can have it behave such that as I move my mouse further in the positive X and Y direction, my fill color changes. Right? And I think that one might be a little bit more interesting for us. Since we already have changing behavior based on where we are in the array, let's change our behavior where our mouse is globally relative to the display window. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my fill line here and bring it down to my draw structure. And right before I start drawing my ellipses, I'm going to put the fill in right here. And what we want to do is, let's say that we want to change the blue hue of our RGB color values, right? So what we could do is we could say, well, let's take the total possible values for color, 255, and let's multiply that by a simple expression. So I'll do multiply by, and we'll do width minus mouse x, right? So that will take the difference between the width of the processing display window and my current mouse position and use it to calculate how blue my circles will be. So I'll hit play or run, and as I move my mouse over to the right, it should be more blue, and to the left, less blue. But I'm not seeing that working very well. RGB. So this is 400. This should be between 0 and 400. So this should be, I know what I need to do. I need this to be between 0 and 1. So first I need width minus mouse x, so that could be something like, if my mouse was here, maybe that's 300. I need to divide that by the width again so that it's between 0 and 1. There we go. So as I move my mouse over to the right, it gets more green, right? And notice that each one, or like all of the circles, are getting the same color treatment, right? So if you wanted the trail to have incremental color treatment, you could move this inside the loop here, and instead of using mouse X, we could use my X index, right? So that no matter where it is, we have a kind of spectrum of color. You can see that they're moving from, as I move my mouse across, blue to green and vice versa, but the ones in between are showing the color that's in between those two ranges. So that's a really good addition to this file. Thank you very much for the suggestion. I'm going to save this. I'll add a few more frames so we can see kind of what happens as we move our mouse around. This is pretty interesting. All right? And if we wanted to, we could have the mouse click determine when we save an image as well, just by copying and pasting that same bit of code from our last exercise.